Happy day all. This is Mahesh Kumar working as an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at B.V. Raju Institute of Technology, Narsapur campus. I'm dealing with the course Python programming, and in this session today I'm going to discuss about object-oriented programming concepts. So before moving into the topic, we just see what could be the objectives of learning this particular topic. So after learning this particular topic, we will be understanding the concepts of object-oriented programming. We can know the advantages of object-oriented programming, and then we can apply and analyze the concepts of object-oriented programming, and we can make a differentiation among procedural-oriented concepts and object-oriented concepts. Now let's move into the concept. What is object-oriented programming? Object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm where the programming will be based on the concepts of a class and objects. It is a way of approach for modeling concrete real-world things as well as relations among the things. So we can model the real-world entities as a software object that will have some data associated with it, and then we can perform some operations on that particular data. So what is object in object-oriented programming? So we should be very clear about what is a class and what is an object. So first we will discuss about an object. What is object in object-oriented programming? So when I say object in object-oriented programming, the object will be composed of two things. The first thing is every object will have a state, and second one, it will have a behavior. So when we take any real-time object, right? If I take an example of a fan is a real-world object where it will have a state, it will have a behavior, right? So what do you mean by state and behavior? That we have to understand carefully. So for an object, what is state and what is behavior? So when I say state of an object, it will describe about an object. A state of an object always describes about an object. And when I say behavior of an object, it will tell how this object is going to respond. The response given by the object can be described as the behavior of an object. So every real-world object will have these two things, a state and a behavior. Now, by making use of object-oriented programming concept, we will be modeling a real object into a software object. So when I say software object, what does it mean? So that we will discuss in the next slide. So before going to that, we will see an example of an object. A real world object called car. Right? So what could be the state of this particular car object? A car object consists of a brand, a model, a color, a registered number, speed of the car, etc. So all these are the state of a car object. So what this state is going to do for an object is it will describe about a particular object. Now when I say what could be the behavior of this car object. So when I say the behavior of the car object, when we start, the car will start, the car can stop, the car can accelerate, we can apply brake for the car. So based on this particular things, the behavior of an object will be changed. So I hope you have understood what is the state and behavior of a car. Now we will try to model this real world object into a software object by making use of object-oriented concepts. So in object-oriented concept, we call this real world object as a software object. which is very similar to a real world object. We will model this particular software object, which is very similar to the real world object. Conceptually same. So when I say conceptually same, what we talked, an object consists of a state and behavior. So software object also consists of state and related behavior. But when we use it as a software object, how you are going to describe the state for the object and how you are going to describe the behavior of an object, that we will be discussing in this slide. So for a real world object, always the state will be described in the form of fields. So when we write a program or when we model a software object, the state of this particular object will always be described in fields that we will be calling as variables in our program. And when I say behavior of a software object, we will expose the behavior of the object through a concept called methods. So if you want to model a software object using object-oriented concepts, the state of the object will be described inside a variable, and we will expose the behavior of the object by making use of functions, or we can call them as methods. So we should have a combination of variables and methods to describe the state and behavior of a software object. So that we will do by making use of the concepts of object-oriented programming. So when I say methods are very useful in object-oriented programming. Methods are very useful in object-oriented programming. Why? Because by making use of these particular methods, we are going to do some operations on the data. And these methods will play a vital role to make communication among different objects. So totally, by knowing about all these points, we can make a single point about a software object. A software object is a combination of data fields and functions or methods. Now let us see example of a software object. Now I want to model a software object called a student object. Now when I say student object, what could be the state for this particular object, right? And what could be the behavior of this particular object? So when I take a software object called student, always the state of this particular student object consists of a student number, a student name, and student badge. All these are called the properties, or we can also call it as characteristics of an object. So what a state of an object is describing, it will describe the properties or characteristics of a particular object. And when I say the behavior of an object, what could be this? We say that we describe that by making use of methods, where we have a method called read method for reading the data of the object. And we have a method called write data, which is going to describe something about the object. So by making use of these particular methods, we are going to expose the behavior of the object called student. Now, up to this point, we have understood how to model an object, what object consists of. But if somebody asks you, what do you mean by object? You should be ready to define it. And what do you mean by class? Because we said that object-oriented program is the programming paradigm where we will use the concepts of classes and objects. Now, what is this class? What is this object? That we have to define them. So when I say a class in object-oriented programming, it is a template that will be used for creating different types of objects. where we will provide initial state for that particular object, and we will do some implementations of behavior for that particular object. So we can define a class as a template for creating objects, providing initial values for the state, and implementing the behavior for the object. And when I say object, we call object as instance for a class or a copy of a specific class. Now, how this class and object can be created in our program. So whenever you want to use a class in our program, right, what you have to do, how you have to declare this particular, how you have to define this particular class, and how you have to create this particular object. That we will see in the next slide. So before going to that, let us see example of what is class and object. So if you see this particular diagram, we can see here a vehicle. I will define a class called vehicle, right? For this particular vehicle, I will be creating objects called a car object, a truck object, bike object, and cycle. So these are the different types of objects that we can create for the vehicle class. So this is an example of how we are going to use classes and objects in our program. Now we have to write a program for creating a class and for creating objects. So how we will do this particular things that we will be discussing. So whenever you want to define a class and object-oriented program, you have to use a keyword called class. By making use of this keyword class, we can define a class in object-oriented program by making use of Python. So what is the syntax for defining this class? A class keyword followed by what is the name of the class that you have to provide, right? Then you have to have a block of statements where you are going to describe about the object. So this description is about the state and behavior of the object. So this description is about a state and behavior of the object. So by this we can understand that a class will always consist of two things. One is it consists data members, and it consists data methods. Now see how we are going to link this. So when you combine data members and data methods, which are put inside the definition of the class, that will tell you about an object. That is the reason we define a class as a template for creating objects. So what we will do in the definition of the class, we are going to describe how the object has to be created. Now after creating the object, what should be the state of the object is described in data members, and what would be the behavior of the object is described in the methods. Now what this class block consists of is two types of statements. We have to collect data methods where we are going to describe the properties of the object, and we should collect some methods which are used for operations on this particular data of the object. So in this way you have to define the class. Now we will write a simple code for defining the class and creating the class. So in Python program, how you are going to define the class and how you are going to create the object, we will be seeing by writing a simple code. So just in the previous slides we discussed, in order to define a class in Python program, we have to make use of a keyword called class. So after writing the keyword class, you specify what should be the name of the class. So I will write name of the class is demo, or I will give a name of the class is car. Right? So when you define a class, you have to see that according to the program, according to the programming, you have to follow this particular convention where always the class name should begin with a capital letter. Capital letter. Now do indentation after writing the name of the class, do indentation so that we are going to write a block of statements inside the class. So what could be the content of this particular class? In the definition we said a class is going to be used for creating the objects where we will initialize the initial values for the state and we will implement the behavior of the object. So for this particular card, what I will do, I will use a property called brand where I will initialize the value of brand as unit. So this is the initial value that I'm going to provide for this particular variable, data member, right? Now, so after defining this particular property, then the next statements. So this is describing the property of the object. The next statement should be a method who will expose the behavior of the object. Right? So what I will do, I'm going to define one function. So you know how to define a function in Python program. We have to use a keyword def followed by the name of the function. I will write it as display. Right? Now what should be the block of statement that you have to write inside this display function? So what I will do is I will write a print statement. Write a print statement where it is going to display the brand of the car. The brand of the car is. Right? Now you need to display the value of the data member. Right? So what is the value? Where you have stored the value? We have a variable called brand. So we will write this particular data member name as brand. So this is the function block where we have written a print statement. Just we will write up to this to make you understand how to define a class. Right? Now come out of this particular class. So this is the definition of how to define a class in Python program. So now you observe here, inside the class, we have described the state of the car, that is brand, and we have defined the behavior by making use of a function called display, where it is going to display the brand of the car. It is going to describe about the car. Right? Now, after defining the class, you should come out of the class. Now, suppose if I want to access the value from this particular class, and if I want to access the method of this particular class. Now, can you run this particular class? Can you run the code which is inside this particular class? So that is what you have to concentrate on here. So in object-oriented programming, after defining the class, if you want to run the code inside the class, you cannot run it directly. To run the code which is in the class, you need an object in object-oriented program. Without an object, you cannot run the code inside the class. So what I will do is, I need to create an object. We require an object for running the code inside the class. So we should know how to create object. So what we do outside the class is, create object for this particular class. By making use of that particular object, you can access the data which is inside this particular class. Until that time, you cannot access the data from the class. So how you have to create object? How can you create objects for the classes that you define? So we need to follow this particular syntax. So whenever you want to create object, you write what is the name of that particular object. You see the syntax here, object name, right, equals to write the name of the class for which you want to create the object. So after writing the name of the class, use this parenthesis. use this parenthesis. We'll be discussing about this in the next sessions. So this is the syntax that you have to follow to create object in Python. So for which class you want to create object, write the name of that particular class, use this parenthesis, right? So what is going to happen when this particular statement is executed is object for this car class will be created and that will be written back to the program. So whatever the object you require that will be written to the program, you need to take it into the program and store in this particular variable, right? So what should be the name of that particular variable? You have to write here. So this is a statement that you need to use to create object in object-oriented programming using Python. Now we'll write that. So I will name the object as C. So C equals to car. So this is how we create object, right? What happens internally that we will discuss in the next sessions. Now you have defined a class over here and you have created object here, right? Now what I said in object-oriented programming, after creating object for the class, by making use of this particular object, you can access the data of the class, right? Now we'll try to access what is the value of this particular data member outside the class using this car object. So if I want to access this particular data member outside the class, you write the name of the object, right, followed by dot operator, and what data member you want to access. Write the name of that particular data member here, right? So the data member name is brand. So write brand here, c.brand. So this is going to access the value of this data member. So what I will do is I will call this inside a print statement because I want to print the value of this brand. So I'll write a print statement, right? Sorry. So this print statement, in this print statement, what you are doing, you are accessing data member of a class through the object, So see the syntax. What would be the syntax to access the class members? Object name followed by dot operator and write the data member what you want to access from the class. So this is the statement that you have to use for accessing the members of the class outside the class. Now let us try to run this code and check whether we are able to access the value. Right? So you can see that the member of the class have been accessed. Right? Now the question is, like the same way, how did we access the data member? Can we access the method of a class? Definitely, absolutely. Everything inside the class can be accessed by the means of class object. Right? So what I'm going to do is, I will be calling this particular method called display. I want to access this particular method outside the class. So how you have to call this method? The same way how did we access data member? Write the name of the object followed by dot operator and write the name of the function that you want to access. So the name of the function is display, right? Call this function. Here, when you run this particular code, you will be having one problem that is very important in Python. So let me try to run this code and check what is going to be happening, whether you are able to access it or not. So when I try to run this particular code, the data member value has been accessed, but there is a problem when I call this particular function with the object. So what you can see here is saying that type error. The display function has to take 0 position argument, but 1 was given. Right? So there is some problem here. You have to understand this. Let me make you understand about this concept. So whenever you define any methods inside the class in Python, that particular method parameter list should contain one particular parameter which is mandatory, which is mandatory. So what is that parameter is? The Python says that we have to pass a parameter called self as a first parameter whenever you define any function inside the class. Simple. Whenever you define any function inside the class, the first parameter that you pass into the parameter list of a function should be self. And remaining, whatever the parameters you require, that you have to define. That you have to define or declare. Right? But as of now, what I'm going to tell you is, remember that whenever you define any function inside the class, that function parameter list should contain the first parameter as self. So why? Why we require this one? We'll discuss about this in the next session. But as of now, in order to run this particular code, we require this particular. Because of not specifying this self, you are not able to access this particular method. Say this. We have got this particular error. I will try to remove this particular error. I want to run this particular function. Right? So as Python says, we have to pass first parameter as self. Right? Next. Now try to run this. Will you be able to access the function? No, still, you can see one error. The brand is not defined. So you have written a print statement, right? There you are trying to access the value of brand. So what is brand? Brand is a member of a class. You can see here. Brand is a member of a class. Right? You are trying to access inside the method. You are trying to access inside the method by making use of this particular object. But Python says this as an error. So what you have to do is, so whenever you want to access the member of a class outside, inside the function, then use this particular self parameter and try to access the value of this data member. So what you have to do is, you have to access this value with the help of this self parameter. So how the statement should be written is, we have to write self dot brand. Self dot brand. So when you use this particular statement, you will be able to access this particular value. Right? But still you have to do something. Let's run this code. Try to check this. So you can see here, the brand of the car is Hyundai. So why, when we pass self as first parameter to function, you are able to access the members of the class. If you don't specify them, why you are not able to access the method? That we'll discuss later. Right? So as of now, you remember this particular point. Now what is the problem with this particular code? So everything is right? So you are able to print that the brand of the car is Hyundai. Right? Now for different objects, suppose I want to create other object. I will create another object, C1. C1 equals to car. Now I am trying to create another object. So you can create multiple number of objects for a single class. Right? Now after creating this particular object, right? If I try to print this brand and if I try to access the method, right, by making use of the new object that we have created, C1, check what is the value that we have got. So for both the objects, you are trying to get the same values. But my requirement is, for each different object, there should be different property. So how you have to make this, how you have to do this particular thing. So what I will do is, in this particular function, I will pass a parameter, right? I will pass parameter called b. So what I am doing here is, whenever I call this particular function, I need to pass one parameter called b. B stands for brand here. So when I call this method, what I will do is I will pass one parameter called b, which is a string value. So I will write bens. So what I'm trying to do here is, for each object, the brand value should be modified. It should be different. So that I'm trying to do in this particular code. So what I will do is for first car, I will give it as Benz. For next object, I will pass the value as Toyota. Now you see, for each object, the brand should be different. That I want to do in my code. So what I have to do, whatever the initial value that you have passed to this particular data number, that should be changed by the object. That should be changed by the object. So how I'm doing this particular thing, is by passing one parameter to function. What this function will do, whatever the value that we have passed, that is b, whatever the parameter that we passed, that have to be assigned to the member of the class. So previously, this member has this particular value. Now what this object is doing, the object is modifying the member value to men's. So how we can do that is, we have to do that by using this parameter called self. So what is the statement you have to write here? I will refer the class member like this. What is the member of the class? The member of the class is brand, right? So if you want to refer this, you have to use a parameter called self. So when you write this particular code, self.brand, right, the value inside this class member gets modified into this value that you have passed, right? So try to run this particular code. So you can see. So when I run the first object through the first object, and when I pass parameter called brands, the brand of that car is being displayed. By making use of second object, when I try to run the code, so you can see. So the data member of a class is modified with object of a class, right? So this is how we can define a class, we can create an object, and we can run the code inside a class. Now what is this self and everything, that we will be discussing in next session, right? So that is for today's session. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.